Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ones and all. This is the return of the Smoking Barrel after a brief hiatus. I'm Rustin Edwards, based in Geneva, with my illustrious star-studded co-host, Mr. Matt Stanley, world traveler extraordinaire, keeping that jet demand high.
Yeah, but don't know where to look. Right, breaking news 10 minutes ago. US agree, uh, US and China have cut some tariffs significantly for 90 days. It will go down to 30% US tariffs. Um, let's have a look. Where's the actual headline? US to suspend tariffs for 90 days. Yeah, down to 30%. That's what it seems like. And the market's gone mad. China to
And
lower
the
tariffs on
Chinese,
US goods to 10% from 125. US to cut tariffs on Chinese goods to 30% from 145 days for 90 days. Brent Bosch up $1.50 at time of writing, 11:11.
yes, yeah,
Um,
up to go, up we go. So this is probably going to bring crude, I would think, back closer to 70 over time. Maybe not today, but definitely over the next couple hours, especially since we've got an Asian holiday today. Singapore's
yes,
off for Vesak Day.
yes.
And so this is all going to be U.S. and European related trading as they come into the market and see what's happening here.
Yeah, up $1.60, $1.65 in structure's not moving. But that's to be expected because it's down to market sentiment more than fundamentals. So, yeah, look, I mean, where do we begin? Where do we begin? How was your holiday?
Holidays were fantastic. It's always good to take time off and spend time with the quality time with the family.
Absolutely, mate. Totally. I did that just on my own, which was nice. No, I'm joking. She's only there. The wife, that is. Yeah, Singapore last week. I'm in London tomorrow morning for the week, just sort of doing the rounds. It seems like funny that the times I don't have to travel is when the weather in Dubai is about 30 degrees with a light breeze, and whether it's when it's 45 and humid, I have to go and see other people. So the seasons be changing, me hearties. 39 degrees and 60% humidity at 11 a.m. Anyway, settling
I
about
can tell you what
65,
it's like
40
here in
knots.
Geneva right now. It's cloudy with a light rain and maybe over 12 degrees right now. Maybe.
I'll take it. I'll take it. It's that time. I'm not sure what to pack, to be honest. Anyway, gas oil doing very well, up to $2 a barrel equivalent. So gas oil cracks a anyway, enough of how was your holidays? Where do we start? I mean, when did we last speak? I think it was a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it? Last time we
Just a
put
couple of
something
weeks
out.
ago, and crude was surprise, right around $65 a barrel.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
so we haven't seen much change in the absolute price of the oil, except fluctuations up and down based on what's going on in the market. We've had tariff reprisals and tariff knockdowns by the Trump administration, which has put some support. We had the OPEC meeting, and surprise, surprise, with their increase of releasing voluntary oil to the market. Now, almost half of what they cut is now back to the market
Yeah.
as of June 1st. We had the Federal Reserve maintain interest rates in the United States. UK cut interest rates and a Canadian election.
And Arsenal got knocked out of the Champions League. I mean, more importantly,
Yeah, but that's Arsenal. What do
yeah,
you expect?
exactly. Oh, the carousel of being an Arsenal fan. It's amazing. Anyway, I jumped off that one. No, look, I mean, so much going on. Then we got, talks in Turkey between Russia and Ukraine, which looks like it's getting closer. We've got the Donald, who's in the air right now.
Is he
Um,
in the air or is he on the ground?
I think he's in the air. He goes,
And,
he
and,
should,
and is he sporting that? Is he taking that new jet for a test drive?
well, yeah, it's quite, yeah, I don't know about that. Apparently, it's not a gift. It is not a gift.
Uh,
Anyway, we'll talk about that later on. But yeah, so Trump's on his way to the Middle East. He's seeing Saudi. He's going to see Qatar, and he's going to seeing
you right?
Saudi tomorrow, and then Qatar Wednesday, and then he's coming to Abu Dhabi on Thursday. And
Mhm.
it's funny because I think, and it's just me. There's nothing to back this up at all, as usual. I would argue that the meeting between Trump and MBS is probably the most important meeting of the year so far when it comes to energy, because I just have this hunch that there's going to be, I'm not going to say collusion between the US and the de facto leader of OPEC. Not at all. This is nothing to do with Kepler, this podcast. So don't sue me, don't come after me. I would just argue that I think that will be, as well as the Houthis and the shipping security in the Red Sea, et cetera, and what's happening in Syria and Lebanon, etc. I would think, from an energy outlook point of view, I think the meeting between Trump and MBS is probably the most important one of the year so far.
Well, I think it's also very important not only for energy aspect outlooks, but also for the geopolitical in the region outlook. Because Saudi has to be kept as a major player, and when you think of all the pieces that are currently in play in the Middle East, along the lines of okay, you've got the Israel conflict with Gaza. You've got the talks with Iran. You've got potentially Ukraine and Russia meeting in Turkey to
Yeah,
discuss peace in Ukraine, and all that affects the regional stability that Saudi is a big part of. And, so Saudi is always going to be looking for, I think, security guarantees from the United States, weapon systems from the U.S., but then also needing to have secure outlets for their oil. So yeah, there's probably a 1-2 punch there to keep Saudi on side when it comes to talks with Iran,
yeah.
uh, and potentially keep Saudi on side when it comes to other peace initiatives in the region.
And how was the fanfare at the weekend? Because I gather there were a few high level diplomats in Geneva between the US and China who are having some talks on. I mean, are these talks are still ongoing, or I don't know where they're
No,
taking
the
place?
talks broke off over so they were Saturday, Sunday. The talks are off now. They're going to reconvene, I think, in a week
Okay.
to give everybody a chance to digest. But again, the talks were both said to be very productive from both sides. So it wasn't your usual Trump blathing about I had such a great phone call. But it was actual the people involved in the actual discussion saying the talks are very productive, and now we see the results here at 9 o'clock this morning. Which okay, fair enough, good result. That okay, we've got people back to the table discussing tariffs and bringing things back to a more level playing field.
Yeah.
Which all things being equal, I mean, to me, it's a case that not liking the method of the madness that was done by the U.S., the shotgun approach of attacking everybody all at once, and
Oh,
then reeling it all back in because, oh, wait, we may have overstepped. Let's pull this back a bit. Um, China has always been in a curious situation because their economy has been built on an export model. And if they
yeah.
lose one of the biggest markets, they're going to hurt more than the receiver of the cheap products.
We're up
Um,
$2 13 now on Brent, above $66 a barrel.
there we
Crisis,
go.
what crisis?
So at the end of the day, China was going to come to the table, I think, eventually negotiate, despite all the political face-saving rhetoric by Xi. They would have to come to the table because they can't afford to have people not working and their plants not operating and the export market of the United States being closed off to them.
Okay,
They
listen.
just
Listen, as an American, a proud one living in Switzerland, I just want to ask you. Sorry, that was low. Oh, straight under there, get it. No, forget all that.
not as
Forget
low as Arsenal players, but hey,
forget tax domiciliation. It doesn't matter. No, listen. I mean, when you're looking at what happened in April, Liberation Day, markets selling off, Trump's ratings are the worst after 100 days in history. Monday's a different day. The 12th of May could literally be Liberation Day. He's on a plane coming over here. There are truce talks going on. He's been part of it. Tariffs are being imposed, and granted, it's not quite but he went big in order knowing that he'd have to come down and compromise. Brent, now, once Europe wake up and they're slowly getting into the office and rubbing their eyes, going, oh God, what's happened now? And the US getting later, S&P rallies, tech rallies again. Everyone's happy with China. Globalization's back on the table. Brent's at 70. OPEC are happy because they're bringing back oil. Is this like a genius move, or has he gone too big, too quick, and now balanced it back into some kind of like semblance of order? Because it could be genius. This.
well, it's to me, it's typical Trump negotiating factors. I mean, he came in and he shut out a huge shotgun and hit everybody. And then he says, wait, let's reel that back. I'm just going to focus here and here and put all you guys on the back burner. But it sets the level tone that people understand, okay, Trump and his policies are pro-American and anti-globalization. Let's bring factories back to the United States. If you believe the announcements from all these different companies about how much manufacturing they're bringing back into the U.S., because again, you can't be playing on this field where nobody's going to put tariffs. Oh, it's all level. All of a sudden, you get a loose cannon in the market, and crap, we got to have insulation. How do you have insulation? By building infrastructure inside the place where the tariffs might come from.
Yeah.
So it's been walked back. China has come to the negotiating table, and it looks like they've got a workable deal where maybe China might be giving lip service and all this, but again, China could be saying this is really killing us. We need to come to an agreement. Let's agree to do all these nice things so that we can have bilateral trade again and not have all the problems.
Yeah.
And
I mean, this time last Monday, Brent was trading at $58.50, right? There were, the
well, that was
OPEC
after the
rules.
OPEC announcement too.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you could argue, okay, well, let's see where it settles back down. 66.30 we are now on Brent. You could argue we may get tip up towards 70 because this is kind of like everyone was sort of pricing in fear that China, US, where's it going to go? Rebalancing of trade patterns, stuff will still move, but maybe not as much as people were hoping. $10 a barrel in a week is significant, right? I mean that's what is that in percentage terms? 15% in a week, roughly, something like that. Um, and it seems to be that the market was waiting for this kind of announcement. I mean, that's great. 58.50, now we're at 66.30. Let's see where it's going to go at the end of the day. Probably 70. Let's forget all the good news story, and everyone's going to, probably end up in a bar this evening celebrating the fact that globalization is back. I don't
well, I
think Brent.
wouldn't
I
say
don't think
globalization is back. I would say globalization is back. I
really.
think I think this whole episode in the last 30 days has probably put a pause to we need globalization, to we need a bit more stabilization in our trading patterns and having more assets allocated to different regions versus being focused on the cheapest labor market in the world.
Okay, but it
Um,
wasn't. But wasn't. Okay, that's interesting because it's something else I want to talk about in a minute about that very subject. But what you've just said there, wasn't that Trump's very objective to make it fairer for America?
yes.
So,
I mean,
I mean, if people are going to come back on the table and say, fair enough, I know that he's gone in there all guns blazing, bull in a china shop, however, whatever you want to put against it. Um, People will still have to do business with America. Maybe right in terms of maybe not quite as much, but you take Indonesia, right? And let me quote this. I'm going to quote. Hang on one sec. So in Pertamina, the state oil company of Indonesia, have decided. I forget where the quote was. Just hang on. I think it was. Yeah, Indonesia will cut its fuel imports from Singapore and source supplies from the US and Middle East countries instead. And this is quoting the energy minister Bahil Lahadalia, excuse my Indonesian there. It's to better balance in the changing global geopolitical environment. It is not only a matter of price, quote, but also geopolitical issues. We need to have a balance with other countries, right? Now, this is a really interesting case study because what is this? It's a bit of a throw out question here for you. Singapore, the trading hub of Southeast Asia, right? Long where the Platts window sits and methodology and the Singapore Straits and, still, tank farms and refineries galore in Singapore. But Singapore have long been the kind of stable supplier because of infrastructure to Indonesia. Now, Indonesia to come out that we're not just going to buy solely from Singapore, we're going to source from elsewhere. That's only bearish Singapore, right? But is it a good thing in oil markets in general that there is going to be, when you're talking about globalization, forget the arbitrage where it's more cost efficient for Pertamina to buy gasoline from the Singapore Straits. They could look at West Coast India, at Al Zor, could look at wherever, whatever product they need, but will source US Gulf Coast. It's bearish Singapore, but a good thing for all markets. What do you think?
well, first off, I'd love to see how Pertamina looks at the economics of that trade because just transporting gasoline from the U.S. Gulf Coast into Indonesia, it's a long haul freight discussion.
Right.
And does that necessarily actually work when you look at the economics of buying FOB Singapore and bringing it into Indonesia versus transporting it for 60 days on a ship from the Gulf Coast to Indonesia? My guess is the Singapore economics will win out every day of the year because
Yeah, but ha
freight is going to kill you.
yeah, but hang on. This is the interesting part. I agree with you. On a like-for-like comparison, Singapore netback compared to Gulf Coast, there is no, there's no comparison. We know it's going to be more expensive to bring into the Gulf Coast. But if you've got potential tariffs on other exports that you have as a country and you weigh it up, there's more at play here, isn't there?
Well, there might be, but nevertheless, how much is Indonesia exporting to the United States and bringing in gasoline from because the gasoline in the United States that the U.S. exports goes to a lot of other markets that are far more efficiently priced than long haul flows to Asia.
Right,
If anything, Asia's long product and Asia is an exporter of product, as is the U.S. And so even if you're trying to say, oh, we're going to do this to balance out our trade
Arr.
balances,
Sorry.
the issue you end up with is the fact that okay, the Indonesian government is net loser because they're going to have to subsidize the price of the long haul barrel to make it cost competitive. Otherwise, they'll have uprisings within their population because they're, oh my god, my gasoline price just went from I don't know, $1 a liter to $1.50 a liter. What the heck just
Right,
happened?
right. By the way, Brent's back to below 66 now, 65.50. We are. So down 80 cents since 2 minutes ago. I cannot keep up, people. If only there was a way, though, to check if how what if anything Indonesia exported to the USA in terms of commodities.
If
Wait a
only there was a
minute.
system that did that.
Wow. Let's have a look. Let me share my screen. Um,
Outside of coffee, what else do they export?
well, yeah, because I need to this will be we're gonna want to do it on everything. Um, let me just check here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Indonesia exports of everything. What have we got? Okay, not a great deal. Let's do it in KT and let's split by product.
Well, this
Okay.
is this is spoil though.
Yeah, this
Oh,
is well,
okay.
no, no, it's not.
Nickel.
This is
Uh,
everything. This is everything.
and if you look at it, okay, it's 250,000 tons a month of stuff.
Yeah, of stuff. Fair jaws.
So you really can't say that the U.S. is a massive market for Indonesia.
No, but I mean, what do Indonesia import from the US? 1 million tons of stuff. Stuff. Sorry, you get it. But look,
Yeah. So
there's what's the highest to propane to LPG? So
yeah, propane,
350,000 tons.
butane and propane,
Right. Yeah.
which actually makes sense because propane and butane are one of the large products that the U.S. is so long, they need to get rid of it, and it all flows to the east.
Yeah.
So
So
to so to me, it looks like Indonesia really doesn't have a case to go and buy product from Singapore because they're already buying enough product from the U.S.
yeah, I mean, okay, okay. This is what I mean. This is them. Sorry, I'm confusing myself here. But there's got to
It's all right.
be
You're an
some
Arsenal fan.
issue,
It's okay.
huh?
You're an Arsenal fan. It's all right.
Oh, I'll let that one slide. Um, but I mean, look, he said it is not only a matter of price, but also geopolitical issues. We need to have a balance with other countries. Doesn't say which. Indonesia is among several countries seeking to rebalance their trade relationships with the US to avoid punitive tariffs. Officials in Jakarta have offered to boost purchase of American commodities like oil and LPG. We know they already do. So is it a hedge in advance? Is this like we know what potentially
No,
could happen? We don't want to be on that
it's
list.
it's lip service to get lower prices from the local market.
Okay, interesting. So you're saying they're using potential tariffs to leverage their existing buying infrastructure?
Well, sure. If all right, you want to lower your own cost structure to your own citizens of your country. So, oh, because of all these punitive tariffs from the United States, we're going to need to shift our buying from the local market, which is the most cost competitive, to other markets that are least cost competitive, just to ensure that we get better prices, better balance of trade.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is it. I mean, Pakistan said
They,
the same thing recently about
logically, it makes no sense based on the data that you've shown. They already have a very positive import surplus from the U.S. They import more from the U.S. than they export to the U.S.
yeah. But
Yet,
you just wonder if it doesn't matter about the data, but history. Is it like well, we're just trying to avoid it at all costs? We want to be really close to the US.
but if they but avoiding it, they're importing what, four times as more stuff than they are exporting to the US.
Yeah,
So net net, avoiding tariffs on what they export to the US. Well, what are they export? They're exporting veg oil. They're exporting other things that the US doesn't really produce. And they're importing a whole bunch of stuff that they need from the US, and the US is happy to get rid of because the propane and butane are the two big items that the US is super long and they need to keep exporting it out. So you and to buy gasoline and other materials, like you can't even optimize your freight because LPG and LNG go move on different types of ships and oil.
yeah,
And again, you're trying to push markets away from a more efficient trade of Singapore to Indonesia versus US Indonesia. So to me, it just sounds more like a lip service game where we want lower prices, and if we don't get the lower prices, we're just not going to buy, which will eventually result in lower prices.
yeah. I think it's a really interesting one, and I think there's so many sort of secondary stories to this because is it is it Indonesia hedging? Is it a I mean, I don't want to use the term sort of, you know, freight would suffer on the back of this. Local Singapore freight would suffer on the back of this because there would be those ships that are used to doing, I think, like 300,000 barrels a day of gasoline and gas oil imports into Indonesia from Singapore on MRs would probably collapse. And you'd say that structure in Singapore would collapse as well because there's going to be an excess glut of material that's going to stay within the region that hasn't got a home anymore. Or or the stuff that the US Gulf that does did the US Gulf Coast producers stop selling so much sort of transatlantic into Europe and that flow goes into Southeast Asia, which might mean that other you know what I mean? There's lots of sort of moving parts here, isn't there? So I think it's a really
But when, but
interesting
when you
one to
think,
watch.
but when you think of the normal trade flow from in the Atlantic Basin, you've got the Northern European refineries exporting gasoline to the U.S. East Coast. You've got the U.S. Gulf Coast refining exporting gasoline to Latin America. That's South America and Central America and Mexico. And that takes up all the surplus. So, are you going to start starving the US market to go and meet Indonesian demand, which doesn't really need to come to the US? That's why the logic, it doesn't even make any sense that Indonesia would try to compete against an Exxon exporting an MR of gasoline to Asia, which he'll take a longer time to get paid, or exporting that same MR to his normal customer in Brazil, where he gets paid a lot quicker.
Yeah, look, I mean, other places as well about talking about imports of gasoline. Let's move to California, which you know so well. Um,
Ah, yes. The
right,
wonderful
let's. I
California
mean,
gasoline market.
yeah, this is a really one that hasn't. I think you've got to be in it to understand it. But for the uninitiated, God bless you, the way that Californian gasoline works is a very specific grade. We touched on this a few weeks ago, but we've seen a few refineries recently announced they were going to close. We touched on it last time. Valero refinery is going to shut down by April next year. The Wilmington refinery, the P66 one, stops Q4 this year, and the Rodeo refinery P66 moved to renewable diesel in 2023. And then you've got others that are going to shut down just because it's not doesn't make sense.
Well,
So
it doesn't make sense because California has implemented a strategic stocks requirement for a lot of these refineries, and it just makes it where you're basically going to tie up all their storage and holding on to gasoline stocks that would hamper their operation. Because it's not like you can go, there's only so much tankage that's been built in California for
yeah,
material. And a lot of that tankage has been changed into other trade flows or has been destroyed because the market is getting smaller and what have you. They don't need that infrastructure anymore. There's been regulations. Tanks are no good. But nevertheless, California has implemented a strategic stocks rule, basically saying, well, if you're running a refinery, you need to hold X amount of days of inventory now to be able to continue processing in this market.
Yeah.
And
I
so
mean,
when you start
what is the
hamstringing your operation, it makes it you're just unfeasible to run because you get one day of low demand, all of a sudden your tanks are full.
what's the objective here? Are they trying to kill the combustion engine in California?
California has a love-hate relationship with the oil industry. California sits on a sea of crude oil. Los Angeles Basin, lots of crude oil. Bakersfield, lots of crude oil. And they have basically have hamstrung the entire industry to develop and to grow because they're more pro-green than they are pro-carbon fuels. And so they are dramatically trying to push to reduce and to eliminate oil ICE engines inside the state of California.
Wow. Yeah, I just think it's one to watch because at the end of the day, they're not going to kill the combustion engine yet in California. People are going to still need the stuff, but it's going to become more expensive. And those Singapore, we're talking about change of trade patterns. I mean, we're seeing the US West Coast pulling a lot of barrels at the moment from Southeast Asia. And I think that, if Indonesia maybe
Well,
bringing
is that going
barrels,
to California specific, or is that going up to like Washington
well,
and Oregon?
US West Coast, both.
Because
But
the thing is, California has that special grade of gasoline called carbob
yeah,
gasoline,
yeah,
which is very, very specific on how you have to make it. And very few refineries can actually make it because it requires a lot of alkylate and a lot of refinement in order to make the cleanliness standards for the gasoline.
yeah,
So it does become a very problematic spec to make. I mean, in my day, Neste, when they were running their refinery up in Porvo, used to be able to export a cargo of carbob like once a quarter. Hovenza refinery, when that was running, could make carbob. But again, that was like a one and a quarter type cargo, not something you can do regularly.
yeah.
So there are a few places that have a hard time making that grade of gasoline because of just the specs requirements are so tenuous.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. I just think that's another one to watch. And I think that all these stories are linked, change of trade patterns, put them in and not buying enough from Singapore, Singapore being a massive blending hub. Would that emerge as the sort of consistent supplier into California of cardboard material? We'll have to wait and see. But there's so many sort of impacts, aren't there, on so many things. But and we could talk for an hour, well, we always can for hours. I mean, I put on my commentary when I released it this morning about an hour ago that I just feel like this is a significant week. Um, Not because I'm
Well,
going to be in London, but because
it is a significant week. I mean, you've got Trump's trip to the Middle East, and all the things happening in the Middle East region so far is a
yeah,
very timely meeting. I mean, is there going to be an Iran announcement this week? Could be. Is there going to be some type of rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel? Could happen. Is there going to be a new, arms and weapons supply deal and defense pact with Saudi Arabia? Yep, that could happen too. Are we going to have peace in Ukraine? Oh, that could happen. I mean, when you think of all the pieces that are kind of falling in together and associated with this trip, there could be a lot of things that happen over the next 4 or 5 days with Trump in region because he likes to make a big show, and if he's going to make a big announcement, he wants to be in the region or be in the area where he can make that big announcement. But
yeah,
I think there's a lot of things that are on the table that could cause upheavals in the markets, both positive and negative. And that's just more price move, not so much sentiment wise, just price move.
yeah.
I
No,
mean,
I
if
agree.
there's
And
some
look,
approachment with Iran, because it sounds like the talks that happened in Oman over the weekend were again progressive. There weren't too many roadblocks. Apparently, it seems like it's percolating along at a slow clip, but still percolating along. That definitely puts a bearish drag on oil markets. And if there's some type of rapprochement with Saudi Arabia and Israel, which I give that a very, very low probability, but it could happen. Um, or some type
yeah,
of Gaza deal pops up, that could happen.
Yeah, and
Um,
the
you've
tensions we
probably
saw
seen the
last.
markets reverse back down to the low 60s again.
Yeah, I mean, look, the tensions we saw last week as well. I mean, especially felt here, bearing in mind the demographic in Dubai, is the rising tensions between Pakistan and India, which last night was a quiet night. The ceasefire is agreed. Let's see if it holds. Hopefully, it will. But that was another one that was sort of another up in the air story. But just quickly on before we wrap up, because my phone is belling. Trust me, I just wanted to show you another good news story. We're full of good news today. After two, can you see my screen? After 2 years of decline, African gasoline demand strengthens in Q1 and diesel follows suit. Look at this. Q1 African gasoline demand growth year on year, up 100,000 barrels a day. Total Africa, mainly East Africa is the contributor here. We have said, have we not, many times in the past on this very podcast, demand growth. Where's it coming from? It's not coming from Europe. It's not coming from North America. It's coming from the Kenyas, the Mozambiques, the Tanzanias, and this really shows you what's happening. East Africa leading the way on diesel again. It's a good news story. Kenya, Tanzania. Look at the gas on diesel imports. So COVID here, kind of forget it. So let's go from 2021. It's this 3 month moving average is trending up. Good news story. I mean, we've
Well,
seen
it's
a lot
definitely a good
recent.
news story for your Middle East and Indian refiners, um, because Kenya and Tanzania don't really have any refining capacity, and that kind of ties into some of the MOUs around building new refining capacity in East Africa
Yeah,
in
yeah,
order to meet the needs of these local markets.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's right.
which
Go on, mate. Sorry.
which is an interesting idea. However, the behemoths of Reliance and ADNOC and Al Ruwais and Jazan, those East African markets are pretty close to those huge refining systems, and they're only 3 or 4 days away. So it's almost, are they better off just building more import facilities versus building the money to build a refinery, which then, oh yeah, then they have to go find the crude.
Right.
you know, and even though a lot of these East African nations are developing crude resources, um, are they still going to be able to overcome the economics of those other refineries that are built, only 4 or 5 days away?
Yeah, this is it. I mean, that's the other one. Something I was talking about when I was in Singapore last week is Sudan. We've seen Darblend come back. I think there's 5 cargoes scheduled this month, so that's sort of moving to Singapore, not moving to Fujairah because there's a couple of units down in Fujairah, not running the Darblend crude. And I think the other one as well. You're talking about what comes out of Trump, Houthi rebels, Bab el Mandeb. Is there a sort of secure enough ceasefire for the shipping fleet to go? Do you know what? I'm going to go through the Suez Canal again. Is that is that then good for East Africa? Because long have they sort of, the Jizan and Yambus, where they're not going south out of the Red Sea and going into East Africa, they're going north. Will we see physical premiums drop off with more barrels being able to be supplied out of the Red Sea into East Africa? Lots have come out of Duqm, the new OQ8 refinery. And then we've got, obviously, like you said, Ruwais and Fujairah long been a supply hub for there as well as Citra in Bahrain. That's going to be an interesting one to watch. I think if infrastructure in terms of the shipping fleet becomes comfortable enough that what Trump and MBS say, or if there is a ceasefire that's properly agreed, then I think that would be bearish freight, and I think that would be bearish physical premiums for finished grade goods going into East Africa.
Well, it would be bearish freight, definitely. I think on both dry bulk and wet bulk. If you think containerization, it's still going to take them time to rejigger
Yeah,
routes on the container ships to go back through the Red Sea and meet all their demands.
yeah,
Tanker freight, I mean, I think there's already been an impact a bit on Suezmaxes from ARA to Singapore. It's down to 4.25 million was the last quote I saw, which to me was a big drop off over the last 4 days from almost 5 million.
wow.
So obviously there is some people trying to price in the ARB going east being a lot lower than where it should be on freight cost.
What did
That's
that get
even
to?
with
What was the highest that got to?
well, it has been in the upper fives at one point. But just recently, I think prior to the end of the month, it was around 4.9 to 5 million for a Suezmax area to Singapore. And now it's down to 4.25 million. So it's, $700,000 drop from where it was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So that's a significant hit, but I think it relates to the fact that if the Straits of Bab el Mandeb truly are open, then that's just going to make those Suezmaxes even cheaper. Should have a lower cost to go Europe to Africa, Europe to Singapore, despite the cost of the Echo Zone.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, we haven't even touched on that this week. I mean, we'll be back. Not, no, we'll be back next week with an episode if you're about. But where are we? So just want to just okay, 65.70 Brent, $7.80 up on the day. Bearing in mind the low of the day was 63.88. Cable with dollars on an absolute tear. It was trading at 133 flat about not long ago, and now it's 31.68. So dollars on an absolute tear. It's good for
Yeah,
people
and
saying
if you
that.
look at the free market for the U.S. equity markets, Dow futures are pointing to a 2.2% increase on the open for the
Nice.
Dow and 3.6% increase on the Nasdaq.
There you go. Crisis.
So,
What crisis?
we're not Trump, but if you didn't buy your stock, if you didn't buy into the dip, you
Have a
probably
look.
missed out.
Yeah, exactly. Have a look. All right, look, good to see you. I hope everyone's well. And happy Vesak Day for those celebrating. It seems to be a day off everywhere, every other day right now.
Yeah,
But
and
oh,
happy
still
Mother's
good.
Day to all those mothers yesterday.
Yeah,
If you didn't get your flowers, sorry to hear that, but happy Mother's Day to everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on Spotify, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
yeah. Ciao.
Everybody, happy trading and have a great day.